Okay.
Okay, Erev Tov. So the last time we met, I'll go back to the last two times we met. Two sessions ago, we went through the prophets with their amazing descriptions, amazing prophecies and promises of miraculous, supernatural things that will happen at the time of the redemption. And my claim was that reading these very powerful descriptions makes people feel that the blessings that we have, even though we're grateful for them, makes people feel very partial about them. I do think they are partial, but not as partial as people feel about them. It depends on how we interpret those prophecies, and we discussed this 2 weeks ago. If we interpret them literally, then we are still very far from what we expect at the time of redemption. If we understand them to be symbolic, to be parables, all kinds of situations, such as the wolf not eating the lamb in the sense of peace, then we're still far away, but not as far away, and we've made more progress than you would think otherwise, and things like that. So if you expect cakes and clothing to be growing on the trees, we're far from redemption. If you expect that is a parable for having a pretty solid and stable financial situation, so we're doing better. So that's one way of looking at the different things. And then we discussed a couple of paragraphs in Harav Kook's writings towards the end of the session 2 weeks ago. We discussed how Harav Kook sees all the different things that we have to deal with in the Jewish state as part of Torah. That's the first point, that it's not, we got used to Torah being about what do you do in a shul, in a synagogue, in laws between man and God, and running a state is not part of religion. And in the beginning of the 20th century was saying that when we create a Jewish independent state, everything that has to do with running that is part of the Torah, and that changes the perspective of how much of Torah we are dealing with in the Jewish state. So that's another that adds to the positive perspective of the state of Israel. The other thing we saw in Harav Kook to counter and balance that was that Harav Kook says that we expect that there will be a spiritual, a negative spiritual trend when Am Yisrael returns to Eretz Yisrael, because, as we described, like a pendulum, because we've been for so long, as a nation, we've been dealing only with spirituality and not with practical life in this world, that when we come back to the land, I underline the word land, to the land of Israel, our pendulum is going to swing the other way, and we are going to think that just having a state is the fullness of what we were longing for, and that creates a religious weakness, because it's never only about having a state and being independent. It's always mostly and mainly about what Am Yisrael is about, and in that sense, it sometimes takes us away from the proper focus on what is the mission and what is the essence of what Am Yisrael is really about. So these are different sides of the complexity of what we can see in the state of Israel today. Positive sides that are very important to take note of and give them energies. And at the same time, there are things that are still very far from being where they should be. And it's up to us to try and work on those things. I'd like to quote, just to mention in a general way, a few things that Rav Soloveitchik spoke about. Rav Soloveitchik spoke about, for instance, he took the story of Yaakov and Esav in Bereshit, where they're struggling over the blessing from Yitzchak. And Rivka says to Yosef to dress up in Esav's clothing so that he will give him the blessing from Yitzchak will give Yaakov the blessing and not Esav. So the picture, that picture of Yaakov speaking wearing Esav's clothing, the Torah, Yitzchak says about that, Akol kol Yaakov hayadayim yedei Esav. The voice of Yaakov in the hands of Esav. And the Rav Soloveitchik says that the idea of this story is to tell us that Yaakov, it's not enough that we have the voice of Yaakov and we leave, like we dwell in the tent, we study Torah, and we leave the world to Esav. I would say, even if I take it to an extreme, it would be something Catholic that separates what is the term in the Catholic outlook? It's what is the term? I know it in Hebrew. What's for God is for God. What's for man is for man. Something like that. Does anyone know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we know what you're saying.
Oh yeah, something about Caesar, right?
Right.
Something like that. Yeah.
Caesar, what belongs to him?
God runs heaven, and Caesar runs earth, more or less. And it's said as an ideology, meaning religion is for heavenly things. This is a physical, human world, low world, and total separation of church and state, of religion and human life. And this will connect to something else that I will speak about in the second half of the shiur this evening. But Judaism doesn't want that, and Rav Soloveitchik says very strongly that we have to not leave the field to Esav. That we have to be. It's difficult for us. Sometimes we like to stay on the spiritual. What's the word in the spiritual
plane?
Yeah. But I'm looking for another word. It's also very mufshat. I'm always missing. There's some words I always miss in English. Mufshat means very
spiritual level. Spiritual level.
No, mufshat means he wants to say it's. Hold a second. I'm trying to think of the word.
Right.
It's not concrete. It's
abstract. Yes.
Abstract. That's the word. Abstract.
Okay. But Rav Soloveitchik is saying it's up to us to enter into the world and bring Torah into the world and make a connection between spirituality and this world. And that is something that the state of Israel demands from us and enables us. It's something that we have to do, and then we have to get it right and do it properly. But it's also an opportunity to bring our religious and spiritual and moral beliefs into the world of a state and human beings and social and society and all these issues. So that's a demand, it's a challenge, it's a test. Can we do it properly? These are things that Rav Soloveitchik says. He also speaks about the blessing, for instance, the state of Israel being a Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name in the fact, simply in the fact that it's Jewish, that the Goyim, that the nations of the world see that this is that God has not left the Jews, and I say about the Pope, the present Pope Franciscus, right? I say that in Hebrew. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name in English, but in any case, his attitude, and I think it's changed over the years, how the Vatican treats the state of Israel and the people of Israel through the state of Israel in a more respectful and positive way. I think that's part of what happens as a result of having a Jewish state. A Jewish state makes a positive impact on Jewish identity in the sense it has a negative side because you don't have to work at being Jewish. You can just go with the flow and you're in a Jewish state, and sometimes you lose identity because of that. On the other hand, having a Jewish state, the strongest power against the
deniers of our
hitbolelut,
assimilation.
Thank you. The strongest force against assimilation is Israel. Bring all these trips of bringing young Jews from the world to visit in Israel. It's better than any seminar go to where they live and give them a seminar, bringing them for a week or 10 days in Israel is stronger than anything else, just to see that there is a Jewish state and to live amongst the Jewish people, to feel that you're here with the Jew as part of the Jewish family. So I think that's something very powerful to say about the state of Israel. Of course, physically, the defense that the state of Israel gives to Jews, I'm basically following what Rav Soloveitchik wrote or said in his famous 1956 Yom HaAtzmaut speech, Kordo Di Dofek, about the God giving us signs that the state of Israel, that the love between Hashem and Israel is time to put it back in its place. And these are points that he made in that speech. The state of Israel enables any Jew to come here and be part of the Jewish homeland. The state of Israel protects. And then again, these things have strengthened since 1956 to now. It's almost 70 years. And these things, these points, these aspects of the state of Israel have strengthened so much in these years. And these are saying some very positive things about the state of Israel. I think it's very important to see these points so that we are full of positive energy, positive attitude religiously to the state of Israel. And it does not take away from the fact that there are things that are very missing. But okay, it's not Mashiach, it's not redemption, it's not all of our dreams, but it is very, very significant and has very, very powerful, positive aspects to it. And that's something that I wanted to put in place when we discuss our attitude to the state of Israel, even though it's missing a lot of things. And I'll keep on bouncing back and forth between those two. So I wanted to make that point. That's number one for this evening. So before we continue, if anyone wants to react to any of that or add to that, please do.
Yep.
I think it's important to point out that visits to the state of Israel are not only important for Jewish kids or Jewish adults, but it's a tremendous way to influence non-Jews to think better of the state of Israel. We see that over and over again with politicians, with just ordinary folks that come to visit. I mean, there are certainly politicians that are so entrenched and in hating Israel that they won't even come to see what the reality is, but the vast majority, it's very positive.
I totally agree with you. Thank you. Just make sure that it's not a visit that's focused on pointing out all the negatives and all, sometimes people come and all they're shown is where there are either negatives or something that they consider negative. But if someone takes it just a broad, objective look at the state of Israel, show them everything, then certainly there are tremendous positive things and the amazing achievements of this 75-year-old state is also something that I think is, again, I don't want to become haughty about it, but I do want to say it as a point of strength of the Jewish state.
Yep.
You're talking about the prophets and the predictions of all these wonderful things to come, and perhaps what we are looking forward to is a state of perfection. But it occurs to me that one person's perception of perfection may be quite different from another person's perception of perfection. So whose perception of perfection do we aim for?
I think it has to include basically two things. I mean, the answer is the Torah and the prophets. Not sure
mitzvot.
That's the same thing, but two things it has to include. It has to include Am Yisrael fulfilling the mitzvot of the Torah in a complete way. That's perfection. That's part of perfection. As long as it doesn't exist, it's not perfection, or as much as it doesn't exist, it's missing from the perfection. Of course, we will then argue about certain parts of the Torah, how they should be implemented, whether they should be implemented. Some people expect, for some people, Beit HaMikdash is perfection. For some people, it's something to be afraid of. For some
Right.
people, sacrifice is part of it. For other people, a spiritual, an international spiritual center of belief and prayer and sacrifices are not part of it. We can argue about these points. For some people, they expect Beit Din Sanhedrin to return with all the different ways of having people put to death when necessary. And I'm not sure that that's something that I'm, eagerly waiting for and so on. But these are certain details we can discuss and argue or disagree about. But having the Torah fulfilled by Am Yisrael would be part of it. And the other aspect of it is social
Justice.
And again, justice is one of the two terms. It could be justice, it could be equality. And those are two very different terms, and they are part of an ongoing argument in the world for some generations. And again, we can argue about which one is the Torah about. It is about equality, is about justice. Certainly justice doesn't mean equality, is it? But in any case, something right in morality and people being neglected, people where there are clear injustices and where there are clear it doesn't I don't necessarily think it has to be everyone totally equal, but when the lack of equality is so clearly a lack of justice, where you have people who when the gaps between rich and poor are so extreme, so that poor people can be dying in the cold of the winter, that certainly is not perfection. I think everyone will agree on that. So some aspects of social values and morals are part of perfection. Of course, there will be many arguments about certain details. But I was thinking you were going to say something else, Mark, because perfection is the dream. Lack of perfection, there's a saying in Hebrew, I don't know if there's such a saying in English, that the enemy of very good is perfection. When you do something very well, but it's not perfect, you can say, oh, you did this wrong. So sometimes people can feel that way about Israel, and myself included, and sometimes rightly so, because some things are wrong. But sometimes maybe we overdo that and constantly compare it to perfection and say, oh, then we have negative feelings towards it. So I think it's very, very much up to us, very much our responsibility to put a good balance and a good balance of energies in these different perspectives and feelings about the state of Israel.
It's clear that perfection is the enemy of accomplishment. And I don't know if any of you have ever done any proofreading. I've done proofreading, for the students in our scientific group and so on. And I raise proofreading because if you've done proofreading, or at least when I've done proofreading, I try to do it carefully. But no matter how carefully, there's always exactly one more mistake.
Yeah.
Exactly one more mistake. And I found that one mistake. And then, of course, I proofread it again. And there's still exactly one more mistake. Never get it perfect.
Right. Okay.
The point is that the Torah gives us all these laws, but it also talks about somebody who does not follow, and then there's punishment. But the point is that I don't think that God expects everybody to be perfect. I think people have to try to do their best to do the right thing. And if they do the right thing, that's good enough, I think, because there was never a time when everybody was doing the right thing. It just doesn't work. We're all humans, it doesn't. So I think we just have to try to do our best and to follow the Torah is a guideline. That's what it is. It gives us a guideline of how to live. And if we can live by them, that's great. That's what it's here for. Lefiot b'hem. The mitzvot. That's what it is.
Okay,
If you'll let me indulge in a rather personal sort of view or way of living that perhaps relates to this. When we were dealing with Joseph's sickness, which was something that was, out of our control. I mean, he didn't get sick because of anything anybody did. We had a lot of decisions to make along the way, and we tried to make those decisions in, of course, the best way that we possibly could. But of course, we're human beings, and we could only make decisions to the best of our ability, knowing what we knew at that time. We could
Right.
always, of course, look back with hindsight and say, we should have done this, we should have done that. But we couldn't, because we had a body of information at the time based on which we made our decisions. And that's the way human beings are. We can't look into the future. We don't know what the future is. We don't know the unknowable. So we do the best we can, Tova, if we can phrase it that way, we do the best we can with the knowledge that we have at the time. The rest is, to some extent, guesswork and luck, because we're human beings. So we try to do the best we can, Tova, exactly as you said.
and part of doing the best we can includes constantly seeking to improve.
Right.
Specifically, if you take a scientific area such as diseases and medicine and other things, we're never just, as a society, we're never just complacent with where we are. That's it. That's good enough. We're always trying to progress, to make progress, and I think that's a very good quality. It's never enough, but it's a good quality.
Right.
So something occurred to me that maybe see what the rabbi thinks. The Torah seems to say over and over again that perfection is not attainable, and we all agree that the only perfect entity is Hashem. None of us are ever going to reach that. So if perfection becomes the only acceptable outcome, is that actually an anti-Torah approach?
So what I'm saying is that the belief in perfection does not necessarily mean a belief in perfection. It means a very positive situation. It also is a bit of a comfort in the sense of, oh no, what are we going to do when everything is perfect? So here we have an answer. It's not going to happen. We're not going to be perfect. We're going to be very
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. We'll come as close as we can. No worries about being perfect.
Is anybody familiar with Zeno's law?
You're not.
You're not. How could this be? Okay, so I'll familiarize you guys with Zeno's law. Zeno is a Greek guy, I think. Zeno, and he said, look, if you have a destination, you're racing towards destination, and you're going to get, every step you take, it's getting exactly halfway of the remainder to your destination.
Mhm.
So every step you take, you get halfway
Never get.
of the remaining distance to your destination, which
Mhm.
means that you will actually never get to the
You're going to
destination,
get there.
no matter
Exactly.
how many steps you take. So if the destination is perfection, but each time we do a big step, we get halfway there, we will in fact never get there, but we will get infinitesimally close eventually.
Right. This
Now
is
you know what Zeno's law is all about.
Thank you. No,
Maybe
but
the hidden Mashiach.
yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on. So the next topic I'd like to get into is something we've discussed in the past in different ways, and that is something very relevant to what's going on in Israel today. But I don't want to get into it in that aspect, but in the general aspect of democracy and monarchy, theocracy, in the sense of, again, one of the issues is that democracy is not a Jewish thing. I'm sorry, Ilana, I'm sorry, it's kind of distracting me, okay?
The cat is distracting.
Yeah,
Ilana.
I said, it's okay. Sorry.
The cat ran away, got insulted.
Nothing personal. Yeah, it wasn't personal. I think part of what makes some religious people feel, democracy is not a Jewish thing. It's not something that Judaism, it's not anti-Judaism, because there are a lot of democratic aspects in Judaism, even in monarchy in the Tanakh. There are points where the king has to achieve or get the agreement of the people. I'll just give an example in the book of Shmuel, when there is a revolution against David HaMelech, and he returns, and then at one point the 10 tribes don't accept him back as the king, only Judah, and then later on they all do. So it's kind of, even a king, you can rule by brute force and be a dictator, but that even when the Torah or the Tanakh is describing what was clearly politically a monarchy, a monarchy also needs, it's not a dictatorship. It's not North Korea. A monarchy also needs some kind of agreement, cooperation of the nation. I think the Tanakh is saying that, but it is not a modern day democracy. It's not, there aren't elections. There is a king and his son and his son's son and so on. So there, when the dream of Judaism of redemption, when you read the Torah and you read the prophets, and then you come to modern day Israel, I always imagine, someone from the old times landing someone through a time machine in Israel 2023, and what would he say? What? Demo? What? Pratia? He's going to come to the demonstrations. He's going to hear that word a lot. What is this? It's not a Jewish thing. And so what, they accepted a way of rule from non-Jewish sources? What's going on? This is what the Jewish state is about. So I'd like to address this issue in a perspective of the Torah discussion about this. I will start by saying I have a dear friend who is 3 weeks older than me, and we've been friends since he was a month old and I was a week old. And he's an educator and a rabbi. We have a lot of points of where we meet in life, besides personal connections. And we've been at certain gatherings where he has made the point of, before you start discussing, and I'm taking this from him. If anyone knows him, his name is Jeremy Yirmis Savitsky. He's from Yerushalayim. In any case, if you meet my family, you can tell them I quoted him. Before we get into the Torah discussion, and I do want to get into the Torah discussion, he says, but before you do that, look at the blessings of democracy. Okay, we'll discuss what should the Jewish way of running the state, what should it be? But you can't ignore that democracies in the world are better places, put it simply, for human beings than other forms of government, have made moral issues move forward, have made freedom stronger, have achieved better levels of comfort for their citizens, better science and medicine and all kinds of other things. And you just can't ignore that. Torah can be about frameworks, but it's also about content. And if part of the content, so when we're looking at the framework of Torah, we'll discuss it. Democracy isn't one of the options. What are we going to do with that? I'm going to discuss that. But before we get there, Torah is also about making the world a good place for human beings and advancing all these things that democracies advance. So you can't overlook and make little and look down upon democracy and only see that there's something there that is not the Jewish way of doing things. You have to see the positive and be grateful for that and not wash it away. If there's something that has to be done differently, let's discuss that. But we certainly do not want to, again, please help me with the English expression of this. In Hebrew, it's, to pour it's a terrible expression.
The best with the baby.
The baby with the water, right?
with the baby, with the bath,
Bath water.
Yeah.
the
Don't
bath
toss
water,
the
that's
baby
the
out
word,
with the
that was what's
bathwater.
listening. Yeah,
Right.
that's what we're looking for.
Description, terrible. I think it's a terrible way of putting it, but you know what I mean. So if we have to make changes and check what does Torah say, how the state should be run, and so on. Is it through rabbis and rabbinical authority? Is it through a monarch, and so on? We do not want to wash away the achievements of democracy while doing that. So let's be careful about that, and let's be respectful of democracy. And again, I don't want to get into the politics and the demonstrations in the government right now. That's a more specific and intricate question. But in the idea of let's say there's a thriving, functioning democracy in Israel, is that how far is that from Torah? Is it against the Torah? Is it a positive or a negative? So let's check that out in the Jewish sources, but it absolutely certainly has a positive and important positive aspect to it. And let's not forget that, and let's not overlook that. And let's be very careful in our treatment of democracy through Jewish sources. So that's the first positive point. Now let's look at the question of what is the Jewish way of running a state. And I mentioned two things because the group that made decisions, the parliament, so to speak, the authority to make decisions in the Torah is given to a group of rabbis. The group of rabbis is the Sanhedrin. They are not elected through democratic vote. It's not absolutely clear how they were chosen. Apparently, if we look at the judges in Israel today, and the issue again, part of the discussion, the argument going on is the aspect of judges appointing the next judges, which creates a kind of
Nepotism.
Also nepotism, but before nepotism, nepotism is an extreme, but it creates like, what's the word? What's the term?
Inbreeding?
Yeah.
Vested interest, conflict
Mine
of
was a
interest.
little bit, wasn't as sharp.
A group of people who work in a certain field, and they have what is it called? A guild, a gilda?
Oh, the
They
guilds,
call it
yeah.
a closed shop.
But is there a term gilda? Is that an English word?
A guild, yeah, a guild
A
or a
guild,
monopoly.
yeah.
Guild, yeah, like a monopoly, right? So it's like, well, it's like for whatever profession you choose, not judges, but the guys who are the electricians, okay? So each electrician is going to bring in, when we need another one, he's going to bring in his friend and so on. So the judges bring in their friends to be judges. It's not only their authority, but do they have the right amount or not the right amount of authority? But in the descriptions, not very clear in the written Torah, but in the oral Torah, it is described how one, you start in the back rows of, if you're a Talmid Chacham, if you're a learned rabbi, scholar,
Right.
start in the back rows, and then gradually you move up. And then at one point, you're going to be sitting in the front row, and they're going to need a new judge in the Sanhedrin, and they're going to say, okay, X, come on in, you're appointed, you are now one of the judges. And it's not done in a democratic way. And I would like to say about that this is something that's worth looking into in detail, is that in Jewish history, in the history of the details of the oral Torah, of Torah Sheba'al Peh, these discussions exist, and the awareness of the weaknesses of this system, and the fact that there has to be in place the ability of society to criticize and to balance, and not to allow nepotism and people bringing in their friends and so on, is mentioned in the later developments of Jewish law. So what I'm trying to say is that it's interesting to see that there is room for raising these questions and finding a balance, and finding a way of putting two aspects together yes, having Torah leadership as part of leadership of the state, and at what's the word? Cronyism. Okay, that's nepotism, not for
Cronyism?
families. That's cronyism. We don't
Yeah.
hear.
A little bit sharper.
Ilana, you were muted. You're
Fa-
muted.
It's favoritism to your cronies. Crony is,
Favoritism, yes.
it's favoritism, but within a profession, it's cronyism.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. A new English word. To me, it's new.
I'm not sure I spelled it right.
Well,
Thank you. So what I'm saying is that there is, and I would like, this is what I would like to see happening, having an honest discussion by Torah scholars, but Torah scholars who are learned and caring also about the positive, what I'm saying is the positive developments that societies have created over the generations can be taken into account when rabbis, when leading rabbinic authorities are making decisions at different times in history. And they can be different in the year, before the Christian era and after, and in the year 500 and 1500 and 1800 and so on. So it's not impossible that some Torah values and other values that balance that have been created over history, throughout the history of social of the states and the human societies, and have been accepted and proven to be positive ways, positive means of making sure that we have a healthy and just society. It is possible to bring these together. What we need for that is the rabbis who are keen on this, who care about this. I will mention two names, one Ashkenazi and one Sfaradi, and they were both the chief rabbis at the time of the establishment of the state of Israel. The Ashkenazi rabbi was Harav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog. Grandson is the
Uziel, Harav Uziel.
Wait, one at a time. Whose grandson is presently the president of the state, and wrote extensively about this, and tried to make things like this happen. Even he, as the chief rabbi, didn't have enough power in the rabbinic world to create enough of a process, but he's written about it. And if we take his books and work with them and update them, 70 years, 80 years later, then there's a basis here to do this work. And the other, Tova, you're right, is Harav Uziel, the Sephardi chief rabbi, and he was also very open to these kind of ideas. So I think that it's very interesting that these different kinds of thoughts, that the values that we find in the history of the oral Torah and the written Torah, and values that have developed in societies to make sure that we create just societies, can be combined in a constructive way, and that will be uniquely Jewish. It will be, on the one hand, uniquely Jewish, and on the other hand, it will take into account, it will integrate into it positive ways of rule and judgment and handling societies and governments in a way which might even be unique in the world and could have a fascinating message. So I will say that about the rabbinical aspects of being part of the leadership of a state. I don't expect personally that that leadership will be given totally to the rabbis, and I don't think it was. I think in the time of the kings, that was also part of the question. What is something that has to be studied in depth and in detail? What is the balance? If there is, I'll give you an example. If there's a king and there are the rabbinic judges, the rabbis, what does it mean that there are these two how do you say these
Institutions,
institutions,
powers.
these two institutions, these two powers of leading a nation? What does it mean? What is the balance between them? I'll give you an example. There are two kinds of wars recognized in halakha. There's a milchemet mitzvah, a war which is a mitzvah to go to, and there is a war which is milchemet harishut. It's permissible. I would say in today's world, milchemet rashut will not be permissible, will be forbidden. But in any case, in the halakha, these two kinds of wars are recognized, and the halakha is that if it's a milchemet rashut, a permissible war, when the king wants to go to a permissible war, he has to get the authorization, he has to get the okay of the Sanhedrin, of the court, of the rabbis. If it's a milchemet mitzvah, he goes ahead and goes to war. He doesn't need to get permission. It's like, call it in a way, in government making like we pray for this for soldiers. I haven't heard very much today what's going on in Jenin, but let's pray for their success and their safety. But when does the prime minister and the minister of what is it called? The Shasar Bitachon?
Defense.
Security.
Security, defense.
Defense, the defense, that's it.
Defense minister.
The Minister of Defense, yes.
When do they need to get the okay of the parliament, of the Knesset? When do they need to get the okay of the government?
Right.
When do they need to get the okay of the cabinet? So, for instance, it's been said that what's being done now in Jenin is a decision that was made in the
10 days ago.
in the defense cabinet a few weeks ago, giving the prime minister and the defense minister and the chief of staff, giving them the okay and the authorization. When you see that the time is right, go ahead. You don't have to come back to the cabinet and okay it once again. So that there's a way of making these decisions. So in a similar way, when the king wanted to go to war, there were certain situations where it's his decision, and there were other situations where he has to get the authorization from the rabbinical court. And what happens when the king disagrees with the rabbinical court, what the situation is? He says it's a milchemet mitzvah. They say it's a milchemet rashut. He gives the soldiers the order to go to war because he says it's a milchemet mitzvah. They say, wait a minute, it's a milchemet rashut. Take the 6-day war. Do we have to wait for the enemy's armies to fire first, and then the chief of staff doesn't need authorization to give the order to fire back? But who makes the decision that the intelligence information is that they're going to start a war, and therefore we're going to surprise them and we're going to fire first, which was the tremendous decision that was made in the 6-day war and brought tremendous results and tremendous victory. It had to do with making that decision, and it's not an easy decision to make.
Right.
Who makes the decision? So even in the time of the written Torah, of the oral Torah, of a king and the rabbinical court that have the authorities to make the decisions, there can be tensions there. These are things that always have to be handled. So I can see that the Torah, it's not like there is one or other. And I believe that, just like I said about the rabbinical court, these things can be implemented with the unique Jewish aspects to them, while taking into account things that have been put in place in modern societies throughout the generations, including it has to be up to our lives, because technology is changing, and the abilities and the need to defend from some things, and the abilities that we have to attack and where we can and so on are so different than the world in the past, that we have to use also modern tools in making these decisions. Right. So I firmly believe that we can make a certain overlap and combination of using Torah concepts and principles, and at the same time linking them with the way things should be run in a modern state. It demands, of course, the rabbis who want to do this and understand their limitations and understand their responsibilities, and politicians who want, and society, it's not the politicians, it's a society that wants to create this kind of combination that appreciates the knowledge and the shikul dat, the again
Decision making, the
Judgment.
logical, yeah. What
judgment,
happened?
the judgment of the rabbis and wants to bring these two together. It cannot be done forcefully. It cannot be done by a small majority forcing it on a large minority. It has to be done in a way that is, or in a society that is seeking this kind of thing. So it's not happening tomorrow morning, but I do believe that we can prepare and try to work towards such goals. And I have not yet discussed the monarchy. So I've discussed the rabbinical court and the relationship between the rabbis and the political leadership. And I'm not going to do that today. We've run out of time. But for next time, we can return to discuss the question of the king, of the monarchy. Does the Jewish state have to be a monarchy? Because that's what's mentioned in the Torah, that there is a king, and that is the history of the Tanakh, that there were kings, and that is the brit, the covenant between Hashem and the house of David. So does the political leadership have to be a monarchy?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there, or can it be a democracy? How do we handle this issue? That we're going to have to leave for next time, whenever that will be. So for now, I welcome comments.
Yeah, could I say something about this?
Yes.
Thank you.
I mean, for me, the question, as silly as it sounds, that the question isn't really democracy. That the question is having concentration of power. And if you look through history, I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu created history for us to learn from, and not just to ignore and say, well, they're the goyim. And if you look in if you look in Jewish history also.
Explicitly in the Torah, history is mentioned explicitly in the Torah in Parashat Ha'azinu, that we look at history to learn from it. Ask your elders, they should teach you about what happened in the world before you got here.
So if you look through history, every single time that one person gained power, he destroyed the country. Either he destroyed the country or his children destroyed the country, or maybe his grandchildren. And also in Jewish thing, Solomon, he was the great king. And what happened? He got concentration of power. That was the end of the state of the state of Greater Israel. And then so the important thing is to protect against concentration of power. And I mean, it's true, you know, one can enter into politics and say how to keep that. But I think that the goal is to try to get the wise people together. But even that, if you have a group of crony of wise people, that can also go wrong. Who said that? Somebody said, I think McNamara said that the worst period, one of the worst periods of American history was when Kennedy got all the wise people together, and then they got into the Vietnam War, and because they don't have and Hebrew University, it's a wonderful university, but it's better when there are other universities, such as, well, other universities, because then the people in Hebrew University can't just pick their students and their favorite people. And every single thing, you have to have diversity of some sort in order to safeguard against the worst things.
Excuse me for 1 second, please. I'm just getting a Tanakh with English to react to what you're saying. 1 second, please.
The concept that you're elucidating, of course, Eliezer, is separation of powers. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would like to say that we can, again, find, like I was saying before, we can find a combination. We can find the concepts of this.
Now I've lost the sound. I've lost the Okay. I think this is anything of this to say.
Okay. We can find in the history of both Tanakh and the oral law, we can find this kind of, it's not exactly Rousseau, it's not exactly modern balance of powers, but the idea, the concept, yes, we can find it. And again, I would say that I would like to see, what I would strive to see is seeking a combination of the Jewish sources and the Jewish aspects, and with what we have learned over history, like you were saying. And I'd like to point out to you Psalm 122, Tehillim Kuf Kaf Bet, which is Shir HaMa'alot LeDavid, Samachti Ba'omrim Li Beit Adonai Nelech. We will not discuss now the monarchy issue, monarchy and democracy. We'll discuss that next time, whenever that will be. But it's a song about Jerusalem. It's the song, Shir HaMa'alot. I was glad when they said to me, let us go into the house of the Lord. When our feet stood within thy gates, Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim abnuya ki ir shechubra la yachdav. Jerusalem built is a city that is connected together. And then what does it discuss? It discusses, Tehillim Kuf Kaf Bet 122, discusses the house of the Lord, which is Beit HaMikdash. It also says later on in Pasuk 5, Pasuk Hey, there are set the thrones of judgment, the thrones of the house of David. Shama Yashvu Chisot Mishpat Chisot Beit David. The judges are mentioned. The house of David is mentioned. The Mikdash is mentioned. And then the Psukim say, Sha'alu Shlom Yerushalayim, Yishlayu Ohavayich. Pray for the peace of Yerushalayim. And Leman Yehi Shalom B'Chelech. May their peace be within thy walls, prosperity within thy palaces. Leman Achai V'Re'ai, for my brothers and companions' sake, I will now say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I seek thy good. The fascinating aspect of this chapter in Tehillim is that we have different powers of government, or different institutions of power and leadership in the people. We have the temple, we have the judges, we have the king. And therefore, what do we need to pray for Jerusalem? In one word, for what do we need to pray?
Peace.
Peace.
Peace. I was muted. I said shalom.
Shalom, peace. Meaning,
I think Michael muted me.
no, I did. I muted it because there was noise coming from someone's home. But in any case, on the one hand, we need a temple, spiritual center. We need judges, a judicial system. We need a king, a political leader. All these systems are needed. On the other, and you can't put the political leader in the center, in the capital of the state, and let's put the temple, either Tura or in Eilat. No, the temple has to be at the center, and the political center has to be where the spiritual center is, and the court has to be where the political and the religious centers are. And that means that there's going to be tension between these different forces. And there are going to be demonstrations, and there are going to be power struggles. And you need to pray for peace for Yerushalayim. So this chapter in Tehillim is saying we need all of these institutions. And please, God, let there be peace between all these institutions, because they're going to be struggling in this pull and tug of who has more power. And let's hope that we can do it in a peaceful way. It's fascinating to discover that this is how relevant a 3,000-year-old psalm is 3,000 years.
Relevant. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, Eliezer, I agree. So we have to, but I don't think we have to overlook Jewish sources and ignore them. And I also don't think that bringing them in to the discussion of how to run a modern state does not inevitably mean that we reinstitute them the same way they were 3,000 years ago. It means that there are some concepts there, some spiritual and concepts of belief in Torah min hashamayim, in something that is coming from above us, that we can implement and combine them with these conclusions, as you describe them, that we have concluded from so many years of history of different governments and societies. And that's what I'd like to continue to do. And as I said, when we meet again, to discuss the question of, does it have to be a monarchy, and how do we resolve that with the advantages of modern democracy?
That's a good question.
That's for next time.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Good night.
Okay, thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Bye.
I'd just like to say that this is very germane, very topical, and quite brilliant. Rabbi, I think you should convene a Sanhedrin and make it work.
Like Napoleon did.
Mark, I've been saying now, seeing what's going on in Israel in the last half a year, I've been saying, you think we can build Beit HaMikdash? If we
Good
can,
question.
on the non-religious judicial system, and look what a war it's creating within us. You think we can agree on how to run a holy Torah Beit Mikdash? The war over that is going to be greater than the war over the non-religious judicial system.
Right.
And so if we want to have Jewish dreams come true, we have to learn how to talk and listen and reach decisions in a reasonable way, and not create a civil war over these issues.
Right.
Until we learn to do that, there's no way we are putting in place Mikdash or Sanhedrin of anything of the like.
You're right.
You're expressing something
with
that's really very important and very what shall we say, very profound and if publicized could have strong effects, because there are religious people who believe in the goal of Beit HaMikdash, and if they have the perspective that you have, it's quite clear that we're not going about it in the right way. I occasionally write talkbacks in the English language Israeli press, and one of the things I wrote recently was, if all this stuff is really so important, if it really is so important, why aren't we doing it together?
It's a good question.
I did publicize it in an article that was publicized in one of the newspapers. I just need a good PR person to.
Mark is volunteering. We volunteer, Mark.
Do you want to send it to us?
Charlie, you can-
I don't know that I have it saved anywhere, but
His computer.
Anyway.
If you feel so inclined, update it and send it as widely as you wish.
okay.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Very
you.
beautiful.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
לילה טוב.
לילה טוב, לילה טוב. תודה. איך אני עושה את זה?